Good evening, everyone. This is Dennis Day. I wanted to share with you some of the books that are currently being read that deal with the events of the moment. Precisely the protests, the history behind race relations in the United States, and the various eras of civil rights, Jim Crow period, of course, the Civil War. These periods that had such a dynamic impact upon how we perceive our nation and how we interact with one another on a day-to-day basis, actually, in terms of race relations in the United States of America. And I think, unlike any period in our history, there is a focus now and a predisposition towards learning and becoming better educated about race relations in the United States and how we arrived at this current juncture. So I use as my indices for how we might look through the prism of race, what is currently being written and what is currently being read on the New York Times bestsellers list. It's not a coincidence that the top 10 on the bestsellers list are all top topics or subjects that deal with race relations in the United States of America. And I'll give you a rundown of what those top 10 books are so you can get a sense of the culture, where we are, the defining moment that are occurring as we speak, in terms of what the culture is speaking, what is being understood, or what we're grappling with on an individual and corporate basis in the United States of America. The number one book on the booksellers best list, New York Times bestsellers list, is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. It's a historical and cultural analysis on what causes defensive moves by white people and how this inhibits cross-cultural, cross-racial dialogue. Number two, So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Ulua, a look at the contemporary racial landscape of the United States. Number three, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, a primer for creating a more just and equitable society through identifying and opposing racism. Number four, Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Saad, ways to understand and possibly counteract white privilege. Number five, The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, a law professor takes aim at the war on drugs, mass incarceration, and their impact on black men. Number six, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, the ways in which the government caused residential segregation through racial zoning and other systematic practices. Number seven, Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates, winner of the 2015 National Book Award for Nonfiction, a meditation on race in America as well as a personal story framed as a letter to the author's teenage son. Number eight, Untamed by Glennon Doyle. The activist and public speaker describes her journey of listening to her inner voice. And number nine, Stamped from the Beginning, also by Ibram X. Kendi, winner of the 2016 National Book Award for Nonfiction, a look at anti-black racist ideas and their effect on the course of American history. And number 10, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, which incidentally was made into a feature-length movie, a great movie I'd highly recommend as well. Brian Stevenson, of course, is a law professor and MacArthur Grant recipient. His memoir of his decades of work to free innocent people condemned to death. So there you have the 10 nonfiction bestsellers on the New York Times bestseller list. all of which deal in some form or fashion with race relations, with the history of white supremacy and racism in the United States of America, two topics that are present in today's society and, of course, in each news cycle over the past month or so. And I trust that we are trying to look inside not only our historical context, but our own personal and interpersonal references so that we can get a better understanding of what we need to know and what we need to reconcile in our communities, in our boardrooms, among our committees, and in our daily lives and interactions as citizens in this great nation. We're at a precipice. There's no doubt that the pendulum has swung and continues. We need to be abreast of the current events, of the types of readings that are available to us for deepening our understanding, for enabling us to be able to converse with confidence about historical events. I might note, for example, the reference to Tulsa, the Tulsa riots of 100 years ago. So many Americans profess not to have known anything about the occurrence of one of the most brutal events to occur in the history of the United States. And there are reasons for our lack of knowledge or ignorance to these events. It's been largely, unfortunately, by design. It may have been thought to have been the most appropriate course to take, but it turns out that in hindsight, it's been a mistake to ignore and neglect the history of the African American and to compartmentalize that history into 1 month, 28 days in February, and expect there to be some common knowledge that we share regarding our perspectives on living and working and being in the United States of America. We need to come closer to our own realities as a nation. And the only way really to do that is to look inside oneself and say, what is it that I fear, or what is it that I do not know about the experience of African American people? What is it that I perhaps need to know that I'm unaware of? And once we can make that admission, that there are areas in our own cognizance that may be deficient in terms of our understanding, our lack of knowledge and awareness, we can then delve into those various historical references and contexts and begin to connect the dots to see that there is a causal effect or a cause and effect, that causation is a part of the factors that contribute to the disparities that we see in today's America as it relates to black and white disparities in housing, in income, in health outcomes, in employment, and so forth. You've heard these various indicia before in terms of what some of the issues are. We've talked about them. We've spoken about them. We've had conferences and symposia over decades and even now into centuries. But I think we're at a point today in 2020 where we've come to a reckoning that unless we begin to dig deeper for our understandings, we will continue to make the errors and mistakes of the past. You know, it was President Lincoln who said and actually quoted Jesus Christ, and I'll just paraphrase what Lincoln, our president, the 16th president of the United States, said: a house divided against itself cannot stand. I think that truth is as powerful today as it was certainly when Christ spoke it and when Lincoln reiterated it. And it stands true today. So do we want to remain divided, or do we want to stand united? God knows we have enough external enemies outside of the United States to contend with, seen and unseen. And we need to be resolved about whether or not we're going to be one nation united under God, those of us who profess to believe in God, undivided in our resolve to be united, e pluribus unum. So I bring this list to you not as a prepared professional podcast or a webcast, just something that was on my heart and in my sense of not wanting to put it off any further, any longer, and say, here is something that we might want to look at. I might add, as an addendum, several other books that I found quite interesting. This one, Honest Patriot. Honest Patriot, loving a country enough to remember its misdeeds. And it's by a person that I respect a great deal, whom I've happened to know, Dr. Donald W. Shriver, Jr. He's President Emeritus of Union Theological Seminary right here in New York City. He's an elder now, but he's still active, and he still has a lot to say. And this particular book deals a great deal with monuments and iconography and its place in helping a nation to establish a narrative of who that nation is, what it stands for, what its ethos and what its credos are. And he uses three nations to compare how they've dealt with monuments and iconography in establishing markers and common corporate understandings of shared historical events. Germany, Nazi Germany, and its restoration and how it dealt with its past in terms of dissembling the paraphernalia, the monuments and the icons and iconography and etc., markings that went with Nazism and the Third Reich, and South Africa and apartheid, and the various markers and various geopolitical situations that occurred with regard to uprisings and insurgencies and conflicts and bloodshed that went on in that nation. Rather than sweep it under the rug, they've chosen to deal with it proactively. Unlike the United States of America, we've been a bit remiss and rather loath about dealing with being active about a discussion around the place of monuments in our national discourse. Now that it's been forced upon us by protesters, and mostly young people, I might add, and I'm very grateful for their active participation. I'm very grateful that they see the import and impact of these monuments upon American life and the American narrative. I certainly don't condone any violence or any brutality that's going to be meted out by anyone. But the idea that it's taken the people to rise up and say, never again, and that these icons and these monuments and this iconography is really poisoning us and is creating a divide that may not be breached unless we show you that we mean business, that we want to change in America. I believe that's what the young people are saying. And I believe that it's time that we as a nation and as individuals take a very hard introspective look into our own mindsets, our own previous value formations, and question those values and test those values against the histories that are being unfolding in nations like Germany and South Africa, and where we stand as a civilized nation in comparison to our counterparts whom have had difficulties and conflicts and wars and different types of national crises around tribalism and around nationalism and the various fascism and the various divisive political wedges that have created animus and really ruptured countries, nations, to the point of nearly being destroyed, and in one case being destroyed and having to rebuild, and that of course being Germany. We don't want to get there. We've been there. We were there from 1861 through 1865. We were there in our Civil War. So we need to revisit our history. It's been short-sighted in many ways. I think if you look at the historical events that have been portrayed, with a clear example being Tulsa, the race riots, the racial, I can't call it genocide, but it certainly was an act that simulated genocide for a community. For people not to be aware of that history, and for a sitting president to have no awareness of it, it says something to our level of education and commitment to our own history and our own truth. So that's why I bring you this message, unscripted, unwritten, just from the heart. I won't do a retake, I won't do an edit on it. It is what it is. And I'm presenting it here to you, my friends. And I hope that you find a tidbit or some book or some essay or some video that will give you a deepening awareness of the conditions that we face and our individual responsibilities to be participants in seeing that we're one nation, undivided, indivisible, under God. So I bid you a good evening wherever you are, and thank you for listening, and take care. Be well. Bye now.